This is a story about how I finally parted ways with my misunderstanding husband. I'm a 31-year-old employee. It's been 3 years since I married my husband. Originally, we were colleagues, but I changed jobs when we got married. The place we lived in was the countryside, and quitting your job when getting married was kind of a tradition there, which made me uncomfortable. This was the main reason for me to change jobs. The company I worked at was somewhat insular, and for better or worse, it had an old-fashioned character. It might have been that way because it was a local company. It was impossible for a married couple to keep working as colleagues in a place where women aren't well regarded for continuing to work as a full-time employee after marriage. I was treated like less than a trainee at my new job, while my husband continued working in the same department as before. My work consisted mostly of menial tasks like making coffee, photocopying, and cleaning. It's not that I'm belittling such work. Tasks usually done by everyone or on a rotational basis were all dumped on me felt wrong. In fact, even employees who were actual trainees didn't spend all day on such menial tasks. Probably, they were trying to make me quit on my own because they couldn't force me to resign just for getting married. Talking to my husband about it was useless. I couldn't tell if he was even listening or not. Maybe he was avoiding the discussion because if I became a stay-at-home wife, we'd lose financial flexibility. Then one day, my mother called and told me to contact my cousin. After hearing about my job frustrations, my mother had discussed it with relatives and acquaintances. This led to my cousin introducing me to a job. A company where one of my cousin's classmates worked was hiring, and they thought my experience could be valuable, so he urged me to interview. Following that recommendation, I was fortunate enough to be hired. I was thrilled and shared the news with everyone, but my husband hardly reacted. I thought it was strange, but since he didn't object, I submitted my resignation. And of course, they accepted my resignation right away. After all, they were waiting for me. The colleagues who had been gossiping behind my back sent me off as if nothing had happened. "We'll miss you. Let's go out for drinks sometime. Feel free to contact us anytime." I wondered which of them really meant it. My new workplace is in the next city over. It's a smaller regional city, but it has an office district and feels quite urban. What I realized after joining was that the company's culture was very modern. There's no bias in terms of employee age or gender, and there are several foreigners as well. At least, there's no discrimination based on whether someone is married or not. And actually, the pay is better. I now earn significantly more than that of my previous job, so much that I've surpassed my husband's salary. Probably it's because there's no gender discrimination. Men and women were able to earn the same salary for the same work. I'm now making almost $10,000 more a year than my husband, but I haven't told him yet. It was something unthinkable at my previous job, and given my husband's personality, I don't think he would accept the fact. Dissatisfaction against workplace had disappeared, and I became able to engage in my job with a sense of fulfillment. I'd like to say I have no worries, but that's not entirely true. My husband does no housework at all, so I have to do it all by myself. Honestly, it's really exhausting to handle the household chores for two while working full-time. I leave for work earlier than my husband and return quite late, but he never does any housework. He just snacks and waits until I get home. So, when I return, the house is messier than when I left, and there he is, just lounging on the couch. "I'm hungry. Hurry up and make dinner." Okay. Just hearing him asking for food, a bath, or coffee is just exhausting. In the end, I'm the one who chose to work, so I guess it's inevitable. But to think of it now, I was probably brainwashed at that time. Since we got married, my husband would constantly assert his correctness and point out my shortcomings. Work is tough, because you don't have the ability. If you want to balance work and home, you should try harder. If housework isn't going well, it's because you're inefficient. Get used to it quickly and become more proficient. But since you're the one who chose to work, don't be lazy with housework. My husband would say these things to me over and over again. Unfortunately, in rural areas, men who don't do housework are more common than in urban areas. Also, the married women around me all handle the household chores themselves. Some even juggle childcare, caregiving, and farming. That's why my husband was able to make me believe it was natural for me to do all the housework. Both my mother and mother-in-law were stay-at-home moms. Most women of my generation are either housewives or work part-time too. Even though my situation as a full-time employee was different, maybe I became numb to it and just kept up with the housework as my husband said. He never told me to quit my job, but I wouldn't have quit even if he had said so. So, I convinced myself that since I was insisting on continuing to work, I couldn't neglect the housework. This kind of life continued for a while even after I changed jobs. When I got home after overtime, my husband would be in a bad mood. I would apologize and placate him while preparing dinner and then rushing through the housework, barely able to eat my own meal. But one day, the incident happened. My husband saw my wage statement. I had carelessly left it in the drawer. He stood there silently, staring at the wage statement. I tried saying things like, "It's just because of overtime this time," or "Maybe you'll earn more than me again soon," but it was no use. After that, my husband ignored me for days. He wouldn't speak or even look at me when I tried talking to him. Even if I stumbled and dropped something and made some noise, he would completely ignore it. Eventually, I stopped trying to talk to him, and just when I got used to the life without conversations, my husband suddenly spoke up. When I entered the living room after coming home, he shouted at me. "I'm home. What time do you think it is?" At my current job, there's a core time which everyone is expected to be at work. However, the exact times for arriving and leaving aren't strictly set. So, leaving times vary from person to person. I've explained my situation to my boss and tried starting as early as possible, but still sometimes I got home after 9 p.m. Even though I prepare ready-made or frozen meals that just need to be heated in the microwave, my husband would wait until I serve him. You shouldn't slack off on housework. The reason why you can keep working is because I allow it. My husband continued to yell at me while I hurriedly prepared a meal. He was intimidating throughout the whole conversation. "You're just going to skip cleaning and the laundry and go to bed, making an excuse that it's too late. You're coming home late on purpose to slack off." I always did the quiet housework tasks, even when I got home late, but they were far from perfect. So, I thought I deserved to be scolded. I blamed myself. "Monica, are you listening? I'm saying don't get too cocky just because you're working. I'm sorry, I didn't mean it that way. I'm allowing you to work. Don't take it for granted." Yes, I understand that. I'm grateful. Back then, I really believed it that way. No, I was probably made to believe it. After that, I actively accepted requests for weekend work to reduce overtime on weekdays. I vacuumed and did laundry every day, trying hard to keep up with the housework. And then, a few months later, I suddenly woke up to the reality. Why am I struggling so much on my own? The trigger was a colleague's lunchbox. Her husband was in charge of cooking at their house and even made her lunch. I was surprised, but my other colleagues weren't. While they were envious, they talked about how normal it was to share household duties when both partners work. I couldn't bring myself to tell about my situation, because none of them seemed to be doing all the housework alone. When I casually asked relatives and friends, none of them had husbands who did as little as mine. I was shocked, so I decided to stop doing my husband's share of the housework. I didn't clean his room or do his laundry anymore. I only made and heated food for myself. Of course, he yelled at me, but I didn't care. A healthy adult should be able to take care of themselves. I leave for work much earlier than my husband and return home quite late. Yet, why do I have to be chased by household chores until after he has gone to bed? It's not right for me to be doing all the housework. He could rant all he wanted about how housework is a woman's job or that it's a wife's duty to take care of her husband, but I ignored him and started eating. "So, you're acting like you're somebody just because you're earning a bit more money." He stormed out of the house. My heart was cold as I watched him leave. It was because he'd brought up about money and hurled insults at me. All the care for him until this day was for nothing. I couldn't take it anymore. From the next day, my husband stopped coming home. I thought he would contact me if something was up, so I left the situation alone, but it turned out he was staying at his parents' house. We had some discussions, at times when he came back to get his clothes. But each time, he hurled abuse at me and even shoved me a few times. It was supposed to be a last chance, but it seemed pointless. If I had seen any willingness to compromise from him, I was open to the idea of rebuilding our relationship. But, it really was impossible. Having made up my mind, I started the process of getting a divorce. First, I casually mentioned it to my mother. We talk regularly, so she was supportive of my decision of divorce. In fact, she said I had done well to endure this long and that it was actually overdue. Next, I consulted my mother-in-law. I called her on a weekend when my husband wasn't around. Although we don't meet often, she's always been a kind person and cared about me. She seemed surprised when I told her about considering divorce, but she said she'd be on my side. After that, I visited a lawyer's office. I submitted evidence of my husband's actions up to that point. The main evidence was a timeline of events and a diary of mine. I also included photos of bruises from when he shoved me and a recorder with several instances of his verbal abuse. The lawyer said that it was a borderline case for domestic violence liability, but it should be worth it. So, I requested that in exchange for not asking for alimony, we would forego dividing assets. I rented a room near my workplace and packed my belongings. On the day I moved my stuff out, I decided to settle things with my husband. He had been buying meals from the supermarket and came home every day because he didn't want to trouble his parents. When I told him we needed to talk, he didn't respond. The usual silent treatment, I guessed. But I didn't care and said what I needed to. Let's get a divorce. I'm leaving. From now on, please talk to my lawyer. I left my lawyer's business card on the table, but he didn't even look at it. He seemed to think that if he ignored me, I would beg for forgiveness. I left the house and never returned. Strangely enough, my husband continued to contact me directly afterwards. And his messages were unrelated to the divorce, like asking to have a meal together or suggesting a drive while going shopping. When I ignored them, he sent even more delusional emails, accusing me of being stubborn and saying he'd forgive me if I came back and apologized. At the lawyer's office during discussions, he was overly confident. He seemed to think that I'd be the one in trouble due to the divorce, expecting me to cry and apologize. Smirking, he signed the divorce papers with an air of importance. I quickly collected the papers, fearing he might change his mind and tear them up, and submitted them to the courthouse on the same day. Later, I heard from the lawyer that my husband hadn't believed I would actually file for divorce. When he realized I was serious, he started demanding alimony and asset division, but there was no further communication after that. I think my mother-in-law might have scolded him and stopped him. Even after the divorce, I continued to receive delusional emails from my ex-husband, but I ignored them. However, I unexpectedly ran into him while I was out. It happened when I was eating at a shopping center. I was with friends from my school days, and he was with his colleagues. His companions were former colleagues of mine, so naturally, I knew them all. While everyone had awkward expressions, they managed to pull my ex-husband away from lurking around our table. My friends, having only met my ex-husband once at our wedding, were somewhat creeped out by him. That's my recently separated ex-husband. He's been following me around, and it's troubling. When I said that, my friends approached his table, and as they passed by, they said, "He's a stalker, that's awful."
Ew.
Creepy. My ex-husband, who is timid around other women, left the scene as if fleeing. After that, the delusional emails from my ex-husband stopped, and I've been enjoying living alone.